Enjoyed the drama? Don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. Subscribe for more crazy HOA stories and epic Karen moments. It was a perfect summer afternoon, the kind you dream about. The sun was high in the sky, the gentle sound of the waves lapping against the shore in the background. I had been waiting for this moment for weeks. I had finally gotten the chance to spend the day at my beach property, a slice of paradise I'd worked hard to acquire. It wasn't much, just a modest piece of land right on the edge of the beach. But to me, it was everything. The kind of peaceful place where you could let go of the chaos of daily life and breathe in the salty air. I had a vision for it, simple really. A spot to call my own, a place to enjoy when I needed a break, and most importantly, something I could proudly say was mine. I had arrived early that morning, setting up my beach chair and an umbrella just to take in the quiet of the place. The only sounds were the seagulls overhead and the faint chatter of a few tourists farther down the beach. It was idyllic, serene, and most importantly, private. I had bought this lot from an old man who had been selling off pieces of his family property. It wasn't part of any fancy development or HOA, Homeowners Association. It was just me, the land, and the ocean. The morning passed slowly, as mornings tend to do when you're alone with your thoughts. The sun beat down, but there was a cool breeze, so I wasn't sweating too much. I could hear the occasional jogger or dog walker go by, but they never really paid me any attention. After all, I wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary. I was just a guy enjoying his own land. But then, around noon, things took a strange turn. I noticed a woman walking down the beach, her eyes scanning the area as if she was looking for something, or perhaps someone. She wore a large sun hat, a pair of oversized sunglasses, and a bright red swimsuit. As she got closer, she started waving her arms, like she was trying to get someone's attention. At first, I thought she was just being friendly, or perhaps had mistaken me for someone else. But then, I saw her heading straight for me. That's when I realized she wasn't just passing by. She stopped a few feet away from me, her gaze fixed on my umbrella and chair. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp and demanding, like she was on a mission. I looked up, blinking in the bright sunlight, still a little taken off guard. She looked out of place, like she was searching for some sort of confrontation. Can I help you?" I asked, unsure of why she was approaching me. She looked me over, almost as if she were sizing me up. "This is MY's spot," she said flatly, as though the matter was already settled in her mind. I sat there for a second, my brow furrowing in confusion. "Excuse me?" I asked again, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "I don't think this is your spot. I've been here for hours now." She gave me a look, like she had heard enough. "You don't get it, do you? I'm part of the HOA here. This whole beach area is reserved for members." "You're trespassing," she declared, her tone growing more authoritative by the second. I couldn't help but laugh, though it was more out of disbelief than anything else. "Hold on a second," I said, standing up now, brushing the sand off my shorts. "I don't think you understand. I own this land." Her expression didn't change. "Nice try," she muttered, not even looking surprised. "But that doesn't change the fact that I have a permit to use this beach lot. You can't just set up here." At this point, I was trying to wrap my head around what was happening. Here was a woman, who clearly had no idea what she was talking about, telling me that I wasn't allowed to be on my own property. But what was even stranger was her sense of entitlement. It wasn't just that she thought she had rights to the land. She was so sure of it, like she had never even considered the possibility that someone else might have a legitimate claim. I decided to press the issue. "Actually," I said, crossing my arms, "I think there's been a mix-up. I'm not part of your HOA. In fact, I own the lot right here. This is my shoreline. I bought it a few months ago." The Karen, because, let's be real, there was no other word for her at this point, stopped mid-sentence, her eyes narrowing. For the first time, there was a flicker of doubt on her face, though she tried to brush it off quickly. "What do you mean you own this?" she asked, now sounding less certain. I said slowly, "I bought it. The property right here, this little strip of land. You know, it's not part of any HOA, and there's no exclusive membership. It's all mine." I pointed to the marker on the sand, which clearly defined the boundaries of the lot. I paid good money for it, and I've got the paperwork to prove it. Her eyes darted from me to the land and back again. She seemed to be trying to piece things together, but for some reason, the idea of someone else owning this spot didn't quite compute for her. She blinked a few times, her mind still clearly wrestling with the information. No, that can't be right, she muttered, almost to herself. This is a private beach. It belongs to the members of the HOA. I chuckled, though there was a slight edge to it now. I'm afraid not. I didn't buy into an HOA. I bought this property outright, and it's mine. All mine. And as for that private beach claim, well, it's not so private now, is it? The woman didn't respond right away, and for a moment, I wondered if she was going to try and argue further. I was half expecting her to pull out some kind of official-looking document to prove her point, but instead, she just stood there, arms crossed, staring at the beach, as if it were suddenly foreign to her. The awkward silence stretched on for what felt like forever, but the truth was clear. She had no more arguments left. She had been so sure of herself when she first approached me, but now, faced with the undeniable truth that she had no claim to this land, her confidence was slipping away, and the moment felt almost surreal. But of course, she wasn't going to back down that easily. Not yet. She stood there for a moment, still looking like she was trying to digest what I'd said, but the wheels were turning in her head. Then, without warning, she opened her mouth again. You must have some sort of misunderstanding, she said, her voice suddenly shifting back to that overly confident, almost condescending tone she had started with. You're clearly not supposed to be here. I mean, who would just buy land here without knowing it's part of the HOA? You've probably been duped, and now you're squatting on private property. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was as if the idea that I was the legal owner of this plot didn't even register. She wasn't even trying to process the facts I was laying out. Instead, she was so wrapped up in her entitlement, so convinced that her version of reality was the only one that mattered, that she refused to even consider the possibility that she was wrong. Look, lady, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, though my patience was starting to wear thin. I'm not squatting. I bought this lot fair and square. I've got the deed to prove it. There's no HOA here. I don't know where you got your information, but you've got it all twisted. She rolled her eyes, a gesture so dramatic I could practically feel the air shift. Oh, please, she said, practically sneering. I know how this works. People like you rich, entitled people think they can just buy their way into anything. But there are rules, and you clearly haven't followed them. I'm just doing my job by making sure this place isn't overrun by people who don't belong. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. The last thing I wanted was to get into some shouting match with this woman, but it was becoming increasingly hard to ignore her sense of superiority. Who did she think she was? First of all, I said, keeping my voice steady, I'm not some rich, entitled person who thinks they can do whatever they want. I worked hard for this property. And second, you're not doing anyone's job here. You don't have authority over this land. You're just making stuff up at this point. I don't care what you think the rules are. I'm telling you that I own this land. Period. She stared at me, speechless for a few seconds, and in that moment, I thought she might back off. Maybe she'd finally get it. Maybe she'd realize how ridiculous this whole thing was and apologize. But no, that wasn't going to happen. Instead, she took a step forward, her face scrunching up with frustration. You think you can just walk away from this? You can't just ignore the rules, she said, her voice rising. There's no way I'm letting some random person set up camp on MY Beach. I raised an eyebrow, a little surprised by how far she was willing to take it. Your beach? I asked, incredulous. You keep saying that, but this is my land. Not yours. Not the HOA's. Mine. Whatever, she spat, her hands on her hips now as she stood there, fuming. You'll see. I'll call the authorities. They'll know what to do about people like you. Go ahead, I said, now feeling a little amused. Call them. I'm sure they'll be really interested to hear that you're trying to claim ownership of a property that isn't even yours. Her eyes widened. You think I'm joking? she demanded, as if somehow, in her mind, her claim to the land was still valid. "I'm a member of the HOA, and this place is supposed to be exclusive. You can't just set up like this. I'm making a formal complaint, and you're going to regret this." At this point, I could tell she wasn't going to give up. She was so wrapped up in the idea that she had the right to control who used the beach that she wasn't about to walk away just because I had presented her with facts. She needed to be in control, and if I wasn't going to hand over that control willingly, she would just try to take it by force. "All right," I said, not even trying to hide the sarcasm in my voice now. "If you want to make a complaint, go ahead. But you're the one who's wrong here. I'll be happy to let whoever shows up take a look at the deed. Maybe they'll have a better understanding of property laws than you do." She huffed, clearly not ready to admit defeat, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was probably trying to figure out how to escalate this situation further, and I knew she wouldn't give up easily. But at that moment, I felt something strange. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't intimidated. It was almost like the more she pushed, the more I realized how ridiculous she sounded. And still, there was a part of me that wondered what was really going through her mind. Was she always this entitled? Was it normal for her to assume the world worked according to her rules? It was almost like she didn't know how to handle a situation where things weren't going her way. Then, just as I was about to speak again, I saw her pull out her phone. I had no idea what she was planning to do with it, but it was clear that the situation wasn't over yet. She was ready to escalate this to the next level. But this time, I wasn't going to back down. She was already tapping away at her phone, probably trying to find some sort of number to call or a person to report me to. I could see the frustration building on her face as she tried to type with purpose, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. It almost felt like she was trying to create an official confrontation, as if somehow making a call or sending a message would magically change the fact that she had no claim to this land. I watched her for a moment, wondering if she even knew what she was doing. It was as if she thought she could just wave a phone in the air and make all her problems go away. Maybe she assumed that by getting someone involved, they would back her up, or maybe she just enjoyed being the one in charge. I wasn't going to stand there while she got herself all worked up, so I took a step back, folding my arms across my chest and watching her carefully. "Go ahead, call whoever you want," I said, keeping my tone even. "But the reality is, you're not going to get anywhere with this. You've got no leg to stand on." She paused for a moment, glancing up at me like I had interrupted her train of thought. Her face was flushed, probably from all the back and forth, but I could see a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. It was brief, like she was starting to doubt her own narrative. But before I could say anything else, she shook her head, as if dismissing my words, and continued to type into her phone with renewed determination. "I'm not dealing with this," she muttered under her breath. "You'll see. I'll have you out of here in no time." Now, at this point, I was starting to get the feeling that she wasn't actually going to call anyone. It felt more like a last-ditch attempt to maintain control of the situation. She was acting like she was in charge, but deep down, I think she knew that she had nothing. No legal right to the land. No way to actually remove me. A few minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by the sound of her fingers typing and the occasional frustrated sigh. She kept glancing up at me, no doubt hoping that I would just back down and leave, but I wasn't going anywhere. This was my spot, and she had no authority to kick me off. Then, as if the universe had decided I needed to be more patient, she suddenly looked up from her phone with a smug grin. "You know," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness, "I'm going to give you one last chance to leave before this gets real." "Gets real?" I repeated, incredulous. "What's that supposed to mean?" She raised an eyebrow, still smiling as though she had all the power in the world. "It means I'm not letting you get away with this. You don't belong here. And if I have to make a scene, then that's exactly what I'll do." I could feel my patience thinning, but I wasn't about to let her get to me. "You can make a scene all you want," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the growing irritation in my chest. "But you're not changing the facts. I own this land. You don't. So either you can leave or you can keep standing here, trying to argue with someone who actually has the right to be here." Her face twisted in anger at my words, but the smile never fully disappeared. She was trying to maintain that illusion of control, but it was slipping. And I could see it. I don't know what she was expecting from me. Maybe she thought I'd apologize, pack up, and just walk away quietly, as if her supposed authority over the situation could intimidate me. Maybe she thought she could throw around enough forceful words and I'd fold. But it wasn't going to happen. The more she stood there, trying to hold on to whatever power she thought she had, the more I realized that she was the one who was truly powerless. In the end, it was just a sad attempt to assert dominance over someone who wasn't playing by her rules. She huffed again, clicking something on her phone with a little too much force, as though she wanted to make sure I saw her doing it. "You'll regret this," she muttered, before turning her back to me and stomping off toward the beach access path. I stood there, watching her go, not feeling the slightest bit of regret. She wasn't getting what she wanted, and she knew it. The beach was still mine, and she had no authority to change that. As she disappeared into the distance, I couldn't help but feel a little victorious. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to push their way around me, but it was definitely one of the more absurd confrontations I'd had. But as I sat back down in my chair, the sense of triumph didn't last long. Because I knew, deep down, that this wouldn't be the last time someone tried to pull something like this. There would always be someone else who thought they could dictate the rules, who thought they had a right to tell you what you can and can't do. The important thing, though, was that I didn't let her win. I stood my ground, and I wasn't about to let anyone push me off my own property, no matter how entitled they thought they were. After the Karen stormed off, I sank back into my beach chair, the sea breeze brushing against my face. It was a weird feeling, honestly. Part of me expected her to turn around and come back, maybe with a backup plan or some reinforcements. But the longer I sat there, the more I realized she wasn't coming back. The confrontation was over, and despite the frustration that had been building inside me, I felt an odd sense of relief. Still, the situation was nagging at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't quite finished. You know how it is, when something just feels off, even if it seems like it's all over. I had this sinking suspicion that she wasn't just going to forget about me or the disrespect I'd shown her. People like her didn't just walk away from an interaction like that without plotting the next move. And she had already made it clear that she wasn't the type to back down easily. I decided to stick around a little longer just in case. I mean, I wasn't going to let her ruin my day completely. The sun was still shining, and there was a sense of calm that I wasn't about to let go to waste. But I was watching the beach a little more carefully now. I kept my eyes on the access path, half expecting her to return with some kind of authority figure in tow. Maybe a cop, maybe an HOA board member, I didn't know. I just had the feeling that this was far from over. About an hour passed. I was starting to think maybe I'd overestimated how far she'd take things, but just as I was about to lean back and relax again, I saw her. She was coming down the beach toward me, walking at a brisk pace, and this time, she wasn't alone. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. She had indeed come back, but she hadn't come alone. At her side was a man who looked like he belonged in some kind of uniform. Not a police officer, but more like security? A lifeguard, maybe? Either way, he had the posture of someone used to being taken seriously. He wore sunglasses and a polo shirt with a logo I didn't recognize, and he walked beside her like he was ready to deal with the problem. As they got closer, I stood up again, wiping the sand off my legs. It wasn't like I was intimidated, but I was definitely curious. What was her play here? Was she going to try to convince this guy that I was breaking the law? Was she going to claim that I was trespassing and hope that I would just fold like she had hoped earlier? They reached me in no time, and this time, I was prepared. The woman looked almost smug as she came closer, but there was a slight hesitation in her step, like she wasn't entirely sure she had the upper hand anymore. The man beside her glanced at me briefly, then back at her, clearly waiting for instructions. He didn't speak immediately. "This is the guy," she said, her tone sharp and accusatory. She pointed toward me. "He's the one I told you about. He's been squatting on this beach, setting up like he owns the place. I've asked him to leave, but he refuses. He thinks he owns the land or something ridiculous like that." I raised an eyebrow, glancing at the guy. "I'm not squatting," I said calmly. "I own this land."
I've told her that already.
The man looked at me for a moment, then turned to her with a question in his eyes. It was almost like he was trying to gauge the situation himself, unsure of what to believe. "You own this lot?" he asked, his tone neutral but curious. I nodded, feeling my confidence rise again. "Yes, I do. I purchased it months ago. It's mine. This is my property." The man glanced at the woman, who was starting to look more and more uncomfortable. It was clear that she hadn't expected her story to be questioned. "She's mistaken," I added, giving her a pointed look. "She doesn't own the land. This isn't part of any HOA, and she has no right to tell me to leave. I'm not breaking any rules." The woman's face flushed with embarrassment as she tried to cover it up with a cough. "No, that's not what's happening here," she said, now speaking to the man with a little less certainty in her voice. "He's just lying. I've been coming here for years. This beach belongs to the members." "I know it does." I couldn't help but chuckle under my breath. She was digging herself in deeper. She was so desperate to hold on to her belief that she had control over the situation that it was starting to sound pathetic. She was trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince him. The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he pulled out his phone and began typing, no doubt trying to verify something. I didn't know if he was looking at my property or checking her claim, but either way, it seemed like he was giving me the benefit of the doubt. The woman glanced nervously between the two of us. "This isn't right," she muttered under her breath, clearly frustrated that her authority was crumbling before her eyes. "Look, ma'am," the man finally said, looking at her with a calm expression, "if this gentleman owns the property, then there's nothing you or I can do about it. I don't see any reason to get involved here. He's within his rights." I could see her face tighten with disbelief, and for a moment, I thought she might say something else. But she didn't. She just stood there, fuming in silence. It was almost like watching someone realize their entire worldview had just been shattered in front of them. Her sense of entitlement had crumbled. The man nodded politely toward me. "If everything checks out, I'm afraid there's nothing to argue about. You're free to stay." I gave him a simple nod of gratitude. I wasn't about to get into a big exchange with him, but it was clear he wasn't interested in continuing this pointless confrontation. The Karen, however, didn't seem to get the hint. She turned on her heels, muttering angrily to herself as she stomped back down the beach. It wasn't exactly a graceful retreat, but I suppose I wasn't expecting anything more. As she walked away, I felt a small sense of victory. Not because I was trying to rub it in her face, but because I knew I had stood my ground. I wasn't going to let someone like her walk all over me, no matter how convinced she was that she had some divine right to the beach. And as for the guy who came with her, I knew he would probably forget about this whole situation in 5 minutes. But for me, it was a reminder. People like her existed, and sometimes they thought they could control everything around them. But that wasn't going to happen, not on my watch. After the Karen stormed off, I settled back into my chair, watching the waves roll in and out with a strange sense of calm. I had thought that the whole situation would leave me feeling rattled or annoyed, but it didn't. It felt normal. Like this was just another day in the life of someone who had to stand up for themselves against an unreasonable person. Sure, it was frustrating, but I wasn't going to let her ruin my day. But even with that sense of calm, there was still that nagging feeling in the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the idea that, as much as she was done with it, she wasn't really done. People like her didn't just back down so easily. They liked control, and if they didn't get it the first time, they'd find another way to try. I was right. I didn't even have to wait that long for things to escalate again. It was about an hour later when I heard the sound of an engine rumbling in the distance. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just a boat or a jet ski passing by. But the sound kept getting louder, and before I knew it, a black SUV came driving up the beach, kicking up sand in its wake. I could see the figure behind the wheel clearly now, a man in sunglasses, dressed in a button-up shirt, and clearly trying to look the part of someone in charge. The car came to a stop right near where I was sitting, the tires grinding against the soft sand. The man got out slowly, looking over at me with a slightly smug expression. I felt my stomach tighten. This couldn't be good. I wasn't sure what to expect next, but I knew I wasn't about to let this guy dictate how my day was going. I stood up again, wiping the sand off my legs. The man walked toward me, his step slow and deliberate, as if he thought he was walking onto his own property. "Hey, buddy," he said, a little too casually for my liking. "I'm with the HOA. I understand you've been having a little trouble with one of our members." I wasn't surprised to hear those words. The HOA was clearly backing her up, and now they were sending someone to handle the situation. But I wasn't about to let them push me around. I knew exactly where this was headed. "I haven't had any trouble," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "But it seems like your member has some kind of issue with me being here." He gave a little chuckle, almost like he was entertained by my response. "You don't seem to understand, do you? This beach is private property. It's part of an exclusive community. You can't just set up here without following the rules." I felt my eyebrows knit together.
"No.
"This is my land," I said, more firmly this time. "I own this lot. I've got the deed to prove it. I'm not violating any rules. And there's no HOA here. So, whatever you're about to tell me, save it. It's not going to work." The guy seemed unfazed, as if he didn't even care about my side of things. He looked over his shoulder, then back at me, as if trying to decide whether or not to go full on with his intimidation tactics. "Look," he said, now getting a little more serious, "I don't want to escalate this, but we have to maintain the integrity of the community. We don't let people like you just—" He stopped mid-sentence, catching himself. "We have rules. And if you're violating them, you're going to have to leave." I could feel my patience thinning again. "You're really pushing the idea that I'm violating something, but you haven't given me a single reason why. You have no claim here. And neither does your member. I paid for this property. It's mine, and you're wasting both of our time." The man's eyes narrowed. He clearly didn't like being called out like that. "I don't know who you think you are, but you're not welcome here. You need to leave, or we'll be forced to get law enforcement involved." I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Go ahead.
Call them."
I'm not going anywhere. And I'm sure they'll be real interested to hear your community rules when I show them the deed." For a moment, he just stood there, staring at me. I could see the frustration on his face, but there was also a flicker of doubt. He probably expected me to fold, but I wasn't backing down. "All right," he said, finally, as if he was conceding defeat, but still trying to maintain some shred of authority. "If you don't want to cooperate, that's fine. But this isn't over. We'll be back." And just like that, he turned on his heel, walked back to his SUV, and drove off, leaving nothing but the sound of the engine fading into the distance. I stood there for a moment, letting out a slow breath. The confrontation was over, for now. I hadn't gotten the confrontation I was expecting, but the message was clear. They weren't going to give up easily. But I wasn't going anywhere. I had bought this land with the understanding that I was doing everything by the book. I wasn't about to let some entitled people think they could just push me off of it because they didn't like the fact that I didn't fit into their version of how the beach should be used. The rest of the afternoon passed by with a quiet, almost surreal atmosphere. I kept my eyes peeled, but the tension didn't rise again. No more cars, no more confrontations, just the sounds of the ocean and the occasional seagull overhead. The whole thing was bizarre, but in the end, I was where I was supposed to be, on my land, living my life. I knew this wouldn't be the last time they tried something, but I'd deal with that when it came. For now, I just wanted to enjoy the beach, the breeze, and the feeling of peace that only comes with knowing you're in the right. The next few days went by without any more direct confrontations, but I could tell the tension was still in the air. Every time I stepped foot on my property, I found myself looking over my shoulder. It wasn't like I expected to see the black SUV roll up again, but it was hard to shake the feeling that they were still watching, that the HOA, or whatever group they were a part of, was just waiting for me to slip up, to give them any reason to bring the situation back to the table. But despite the undercurrent of anxiety, I wasn't going to let them win. I had done everything by the book. I had the deed, the legal rights, and the peace of mind that came with knowing I was in the right. I had to remind myself of that every time I felt like my day was about to be interrupted again. I wasn't doing anything wrong, and that's what kept me grounded. I kept going to the beach, setting up my things, and relaxing like I had before. I didn't let the idea of potential confrontation get in my head. After all, this was my place, and no matter what the Karen or her HOA cronies thought, I had the legal right to be there. But sure enough, after a few days of peaceful beach time, I saw that familiar black SUV rolling up the beach again. My stomach twisted. I knew it was coming. I had almost expected it, but seeing it in real time still left a bad taste in my mouth. This time, the man from the HOA wasn't driving. Instead, it was the Karen herself, her angry expression visible even from a distance. I could see she was fuming, her hands gripping the steering wheel with a force that made her knuckles white. She had clearly come to make a point. The SUV came to a stop near my setup again, and once it did, the Karen wasted no time in getting out. She was wearing oversized sunglasses, the kind people put on to seem more important than they actually are, and a brightly colored beach dress that fluttered in the wind. She didn't waste any time walking up to me, her heels clicking loudly against the sand with every step. I stood up, arms crossed, bracing myself for whatever was about to happen. She wasn't going to intimidate me, but I could already tell she was gearing up for a verbal battle. She had something to prove. "You," she snapped as soon as she was within earshot. "I told you that this was private property. And yet here you are again, doing exactly what I told you not to do. Why can't you just leave?" I raised an eyebrow, keeping my voice even. "It's not private property. I own this land. I've told you this already." Her face twisted in frustration. "You're a liar. You're nothing but a liar trying to play some game. I know the rules here. The HOA," she faltered for a second, but quickly regained her composure. "The HOA doesn't allow people like you to just claim whatever land you want." I shook my head slowly, my patience wearing thin. "I don't know what you think the HOA has to do with anything, but it doesn't concern me. I don't live by your rules, and I don't need to. I own this land, fair and square. It's mine." She stepped closer, her face bright red now, and I could see the anger bubbling up inside her. "This is my beach. I've been coming here for years, and now you just show up like you own it? You don't belong here." "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said, trying to stay calm. "But the fact is you're wrong. I do belong here. I own this property. And if you've been coming here for years, maybe you should have double-checked who actually owns the land. Because it's not you." Her eyes flared with disbelief, and for a moment, I thought she might actually start yelling. But instead, she took a step back, as if collecting herself. "You think you can just keep doing whatever you want?" she asked, her voice now tight and controlled. "Well, I won't stop. I will not let this go. I'm going to make sure the whole community knows what you're doing. You're going to regret not listening to me." I didn't even flinch. "Do what you need to do," I replied, shrugging. "I'm not the one breaking any rules here." She glared at me one last time before turning sharply and heading back to her SUV. The engine revved to life as she pulled away, leaving me standing there, a little more than irritated, but resolute. It was clear to me now. This wasn't about the beach. This wasn't even about the land. This was about control. She was upset that I had taken away her idea of ownership over this space, and now she was willing to fight tooth and nail to make sure I felt as uncomfortable as possible. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't change the facts. I wasn't leaving, and this was still my property. I spent the rest of the afternoon on the beach, but even then, I couldn't fully shake the feeling that this wasn't over. In the back of my mind, I kept wondering if she was going to keep pushing, if she was going to try something more extreme next time. But again, I had to remind myself, I had the deed. I had the law on my side. I wasn't in the wrong here. No amount of angry people was going to change that. The waves kept crashing on the shore as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the sand. I reminded myself to stay focused on the things that mattered. There was a lot to enjoy in this moment. The serenity of the ocean, the beauty of the beach, and the fact that I had made it through yet another confrontation without backing down. It was starting to feel like this was just the beginning of something bigger. Maybe I wasn't done with her or the HOA yet. But for now, I was going to stay calm, stay strong, and most importantly, enjoy the fact that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The next morning, as I woke up and made my coffee, I couldn't help but replay the events of the day before in my mind. I wasn't sure if I should be concerned or just annoyed at this point. On one hand, the Karen had made it clear she wasn't backing down, but on the other, I had everything in my favor.
She was out of line.
She had no legal claim to the land, and no amount of complaining was going to change that. Still, there was that lingering thought in the back of my mind. What if she wasn't just talking? What if she really did try to make good on her threat to get the community involved? What if she went to the local authorities and tried to make it look like I was the one causing trouble? I wasn't about to let that slide, of course. I had already been down that road once with the HOA guy, and he hadn't been able to do anything. I wasn't going to let her get away with trying to scare me off just because she thought she had more of a claim to the beach than I did. So, after finishing my coffee, I made a decision. I needed to be proactive. I didn't want to wait around to see what she would do next. I needed to make sure that everyone, especially any potential local authorities, knew exactly what the situation was. I grabbed my phone and went online to make sure all my documentation was in order. I double-checked the deed for my property just to make sure it was still in my name and still legally binding. Everything was good. I had a clear claim to the land. But just to be extra cautious, I decided to call a lawyer just to confirm that I had all the legal angles covered. If things escalated, I wanted to be ready. The lawyer I spoke to was calm and helpful, which was exactly what I needed. He told me that, from what I described, the Karen and her HOA wouldn't be able to do much of anything unless I was breaking some kind of local law or zoning code. But as long as I wasn't doing anything illegal, I had every right to use the property as I saw fit. He even suggested I take pictures of the property lines, just in case things got more complicated later on. It seemed like an overreaction, but given the tension that had already built up, I figured it couldn't hurt. By the time I finished the call, I felt a little better. The reassurance helped calm the nerves that had been slowly building in the back of my mind. But even though I was prepared, part of me still couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. The Karen wasn't the type to let this go. And I had a feeling that she wasn't going to try the same approach twice. She'd learned from our last interaction, but now I needed to be even more prepared for whatever came next. I grabbed my things and headed to the beach, deciding to stick to my usual routine. I wasn't about to let her ruin my time there. The ocean air, the sound of the waves. There was no reason for me to give up the peace and tranquility I had found just because of one person's entitled attitude. As I set up my spot on the beach, I kept a watchful eye on the horizon. I knew that if she had any kind of backup plan, she'd probably try to catch me off guard. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I had a lot more confidence now, knowing that I wasn't alone in this. Whether it was the lawyer's advice, the legal documents, or just the fact that I knew I was right. The afternoon passed uneventfully at first. There were a few other beachgoers scattered around, but no sign of the Karen or her SUV. I let myself relax, even as the thoughts of her kept swirling in the back of my mind. But then, just as I was starting to feel at ease, I noticed a few people walking down the beach, their heads turning toward me as they got closer. I didn't recognize any of them, but something about the way they were walking made me uneasy. It was a group of 3 people, 2 women and a man. They looked to be in their mid-30s, dressed in typical beachwear, sunglasses, beach towels, and the sort. The man seemed to be leading the group, and as they drew closer, I noticed the slight nod he gave toward my setup. It wasn't exactly friendly, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the kind of nod you give someone when you've been told something about them, but you haven't fully decided how you feel yet. When they got within talking distance, the man was the first to speak. "Hey there," he said, his tone casual, but with a hint of something more serious underneath. "You're the guy who owns the lot, right?" I felt a surge of discomfort. It wasn't like I was doing anything wrong, but now that it was clear these people knew about the situation, I couldn't help but wonder if this was part of the Karen's plan. "Yeah, that's me," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Is there a problem?" The man gave a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Not really a problem," he said, his eyes flicking around, like he was weighing his words carefully. "But we've been asked to come out here and talk to you. We're part of the community association. We just wanted to make sure there's no misunderstanding about the rules around here." A sinking feeling hit my stomach. I had been expecting something like this. It wasn't enough for the Karen to just hassle me herself. Now she had to get her friends or the community involved. Look, I said, standing up and trying to keep the situation calm. I'm not breaking any rules. I own this land. I've already talked to the HOA once, and they know I'm not violating anything. If you're here to threaten me, you're wasting your time. The man glanced at his companions for a moment, then back at me. We're not threatening you, he said, his voice still level. We just need to make sure that you're aware of the potential consequences if you continue to disregard the community's rules. What rules? I asked, my patience wearing thin. I've got the deed. I'm within my rights. There's no HOA here, and I don't know who told you I was breaking anything, but you're wrong. He didn't respond right away, and for a brief moment, it felt like time had stopped. The two women stayed quiet, watching intently, waiting for their leader to make the next move. Finally, he spoke. We just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. But we'll leave you to it for now. Just remember, there are people watching. With that, they turned and walked away, leaving me with a strange sense of unease. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I couldn't shake the unease that settled in my stomach after their visit. The casualness of it all made it feel even more unsettling. They weren't outright aggressive, but the threat was there, hanging in the air like a storm cloud waiting to burst. People are watching. Those words echoed in my mind, and I knew that this wasn't going to go away anytime soon. The rest of the day dragged on, and although the waves were as calming as always, I couldn't fully focus on the peacefulness of the beach. I kept scanning the horizon, half expecting another visit from the community or some other surprise. I wasn't scared, but I was alert. I couldn't afford to let my guard down. By the time the sun began to set, I packed up my things and headed home, still replaying the conversation in my head. The man and his group had seemed almost too friendly, like they were trying to lull me into a false sense of security. I wasn't about to let that happen. If they were really as serious as they made it sound, they would try again. And I had to be ready. That evening, I sat down at my desk and started making a few more calls. First, I called the county office to double-check zoning laws. I wanted to make absolutely sure that my property was in full compliance. It took some time, but I finally got through to someone who confirmed that everything was in order. There were no restrictions, no private beach access claims on record. My property was entirely mine to use however I saw fit. With that confirmation, I felt a little more at ease. But that didn't mean I was going to take my foot off the gas. The Karen and her crew weren't going to stop just because I had legal documentation. I needed to be one step ahead, and that meant being fully prepared for whatever they might try next. The following day, I made sure to have a visible presence on the beach. I showed up early, set up a solid spot, and made sure everything was in place. It wasn't just about enjoying the sun, it was about asserting my right to be there. I wasn't going to let anyone think I was intimidated or afraid. As the morning rolled on, the beach started to fill up with people. The usual crowd of sunbathers, families, and surfers began to take over the space, and for a while, I could almost forget about the drama. But just as I was starting to relax, I noticed something, a familiar black SUV creeping down the shore. My stomach dropped. This time, the vehicle didn't slow down. It came right up to where I was sitting and parked just a few yards away, the engine shutting off with a sudden, almost deafening silence. My heart started pounding as the door opened and the Karen stepped out. Behind her was the same man from the previous day, and this time, there was another person, a tall, older man who was dressed in a sharp, expensive-looking suit. I stood up immediately, a mix of frustration and determination flooding through me. This was it. They weren't just trying to intimidate me with vague threats anymore. They had brought in someone else, someone who looked like he could have been a lawyer or maybe some kind of official. It didn't matter who he was, though. I wasn't backing down. The Karen approached first, her sunglasses perched on top of her head and a smug expression painted across her face. I think it's time we had a real conversation, she said, her tone still dripping with that same sense of superiority. You've been given plenty of chances to do the right thing. Now, we're here to make sure you understand the consequences of your actions. I squared my shoulders, standing tall, and looking her right in the eye. There's nothing to understand. I've told you before, this is my property. I have the deed to prove it, and I'm not breaking any laws. You can't just make up rules because you don't like that I'm here. Her smile faltered for a second, but only for a second. The man in the suit stepped forward, his eyes scanning me carefully as though he was sizing me up. I'm James Forsyth, he said, his voice low and commanding. I'm a legal representative of the Shoreline Association. We've reviewed your claim to this property, and we believe there's been some miscommunication. You see, while the property deed may indicate you own this lot, it doesn't change the fact that this beach is under our jurisdiction. And there are specific community guidelines we expect all residents and visitors to adhere to. I tried to keep my composure, but the man's words hit me like a punch to the gut. Community guidelines? I asked, raising an eyebrow. I'm sorry, but I don't know what you're talking about. This is my property, and I've checked the zoning laws. There's no HOA here, no jurisdiction over my land. Whatever your community thinks doesn't change the facts. James Forsyth didn't flinch. We've been granted special jurisdiction over this area, and that means we can enforce specific rules, regardless of who owns the land. You are violating those rules by using the beach without proper clearance. You've been warned, and now we're asking you to leave. A cold chill ran through me as I heard his words. This wasn't just a matter of some entitled Karen throwing a tantrum anymore. They were pulling out the legal cards. I could feel the weight of the situation settling in. The community they were talking about sounded like it had more power than I initially realized. Still, I wasn't about to let them scare me off. You can't just claim a beach because you feel like it. I've done my research. You have no authority here. If you want to try to intimidate me with your so-called guidelines, fine. But I'm not going anywhere. James Forsyth's expression hardened. We'll see about that. You've been given every opportunity to comply. Now, if you refuse, we'll have no choice but to escalate this to the proper authorities. I didn't back down. Go ahead. I'll see you in court. You've got nothing and you know it. The Karen and her team stood there for a long moment, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. But finally, with a tight smile, Forsyth nodded. This isn't over, he said. We'll be in touch. And just like that, they turned and walked away, the black SUV retreating down the beach. I stood there for a moment, heart pounding, trying to process what had just happened. The battle wasn't over. But I wasn't backing down. I'd fought for this land, and I wasn't about to let a few entitled people take it away from me. The days after their visit felt like a strange mix of tension and defiance. The whole situation had escalated faster than I had anticipated. One minute, I was just enjoying the beach like I had always done, and the next, I was facing a legal threat from some so-called Shoreline Association that I'd never even heard of. But I wasn't about to back down. I had everything on my side, my deed, the lawyer's advice, and the fact that I knew I was in the right. Still, that didn't stop the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. Every time I set foot on my property, I couldn't help but wonder if they were watching, waiting for me to make a mistake, to slip up in some way they could use against me. I kept telling myself I was in control, but deep down, I knew the game had changed. This wasn't just about a simple dispute over a beach lot anymore. The Karen wasn't going to let this go, and now she had brought in reinforcements. The lawyer, the community association, and from what I could tell, they weren't going to be satisfied until they had made me regret ever stepping foot on that sand. The next few days passed without any major incidents. I kept going to the beach every morning, as usual, trying to live my life and enjoy the solitude I had bought with my own money. But every time I walked down to the shoreline, I found myself looking over my shoulder. I was still waiting for the next move. I knew they'd be back, but I wasn't sure when or what form it would take. And then, on a particularly hot afternoon, it finally came. I was just settling into my spot with a cold drink and my beach chair when I saw it. The black SUV. Again. It wasn't a surprise anymore. I had been expecting it, but seeing it in real time still made my heart race. This time, though, it was just the man in the suit, James Forsyth, no Karen, no extra backup. Just him, rolling up slowly, pulling to a stop a little farther down the beach than usual. I watched him for a while, my mind racing with possible outcomes.
Was this it?
Was he going to bring up more legal jargon? Or maybe he was just here to intimidate me again, hoping I'd cave and leave without a fight. After a few minutes, he got out of the SUV, dressed in his usual suit, looking far too formal for a beach day. He stood for a moment, surveying the area as if trying to figure out the best approach. Then, he started walking toward me, his footsteps slow but deliberate. I didn't move from my spot. I didn't need to. This was my property, and I had no reason to go anywhere. He was the one who needed to explain himself, not me. When he reached me, he paused for a moment, sizing me up before speaking. "I think we need to talk," he said, his tone a little more serious this time, like he wasn't playing games anymore. I raised an eyebrow, not hiding my skepticism. "About what?" "You've already told me your story."
"I told you my side."
"What else is there to talk about?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't respond right away. Instead, he glanced around, as if checking to see if anyone was watching. Then, he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough that it was clear this was going to be a more private conversation. "This is getting out of hand," he said quietly. "You've been causing a lot of disruption.
People are starting to talk.
And you're not just annoying the Karen anymore, you're making the whole community uncomfortable." I frowned. "I'm not here to make anyone uncomfortable. I'm just here because I own this land. If people are uncomfortable with that, that's their problem, not mine." James sighed, clearly trying to hold his temper in check. "Look, I get it. You're legally in the right. But that doesn't mean you're not causing a problem. The Karen is let's say she's persistent, and she has a lot of influence around here. But you're making things difficult for everyone. People are getting fed up with the attention this is drawing. We need to find a way to resolve this before it blows up into something worse." I shook my head, refusing to back down. "I'm not the one making it worse. She started this whole thing, not me. All I'm doing is standing up for my rights." He nodded, as if he expected this answer. "I know. But let's be real here, you're not exactly making it easy for anyone, are you? You're refusing to even consider the idea of compromise, and that's what's causing the tension. We need to find a middle ground." "A middle ground?" I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "I'm not compromising on something that's mine. Why should I?" James hesitated, and for a moment, it felt like he was considering what I said. Then he spoke again, his tone more measured now. "Because sometimes it's not just about being right. It's about keeping the peace. You're causing a lot of drama over a piece of land that, quite frankly, most people wouldn't even notice if you didn't keep drawing attention to it." I crossed my arms, my patience thinning. "I'm not the one drawing attention here."
"She is."
"And now you are. So tell me, how do you suggest I keep the peace? Just let her walk all over me? Give up my land because she doesn't like that I'm here?" "No," he said, a hint of frustration creeping into his voice. "But you're making it harder than it needs to be. This whole thing could be settled with a simple agreement. You agree to stay out of sight, maybe keep a lower profile, and she'll back off. No more drama. No more lawyers. Everyone goes home happy." "Is that really what you want?" I asked, my voice steady. "For me to just fade into the background? To let her bully me off my property?" He looked away for a moment, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "I'm just trying to help you avoid a bigger mess. You don't want this to go to court, trust me." I stared at him for a long moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air. For a second, I considered it. Maybe it would be easier to just stay quiet, to back off, to let them win. But the thought of giving up on what I knew was mine, of letting them push me around, no, I wasn't going to do that. "I'm not backing down," I said finally, my voice firm. "This is my land, and I'm not hiding. If that's a problem, then we'll deal with it. But I'm not going anywhere." James took a deep breath, clearly not expecting that response. He stood there for a moment, his face conflicted, before he finally nodded and turned back toward his SUV.
"Fine.
But don't say I didn't warn you." As he walked away, I felt a surge of relief wash over me. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let them push me off my own land. This was my fight, and I was ready to see it through. Days passed, and as much as I wanted to believe the confrontation with James was the last of it, something in the back of my mind told me that it wasn't over. The more I thought about it, the more I realized the Karen wasn't the type to let things go quietly. She had her sights set on making me leave, and now that she had James and his legal connections backing her up, she had more ammunition. Still, I wasn't about to sit around and wait for the storm to hit. The beach was mine, and I had every right to be there. I couldn't let fear or threats push me off my property. So, I kept doing what I'd been doing, showing up every morning, setting up my spot, and enjoying the beach like I always had. If they wanted to make this a bigger issue, that was their problem, not mine. It wasn't long before I got another visit. This time, it was a little different. It wasn't just the Karen or James showing up. It was both of them, along with a third person, another man in a suit. I recognized him immediately. He was the local sheriff, or at least that's what his badge suggested. I could feel my pulse quicken as they approached. This was more serious than I had thought. The sheriff didn't look like he was here to chat. He had that no-nonsense attitude that made me nervous, even though I knew I had every right to be there. As they approached, James stepped forward first, his face tight with tension. "We need to talk," he said, his voice a little sharper than usual. "This situation has gone far enough." I stood up slowly, my body tense. "I've told you already, there's nothing to talk about. This is my property. I'm not going anywhere." The sheriff's eyes flicked over to me, sizing me up. His presence made the air feel thicker, like I was being boxed in. "That's what I'm here to talk about," he said. "We've received complaints, and there's been an ongoing investigation into this matter. The thing is, your property might not be as clear-cut as you think. We're just here to make sure everything's on the up and up." I frowned, crossing my arms. "What do you mean? This is my property. I've got the deed to prove it. I've checked the zoning laws. I'm not doing anything wrong." The sheriff nodded, though his expression didn't soften. "We're aware of that. But there are certain local ordinances that apply here, and some of those might be more restrictive than you realize. You may own the lot, but that doesn't mean you have unrestricted access to the beach. There are easements, public rights-of-way, things like that." My stomach tightened. Easements? Public rights-of-way? I hadn't heard anything about that when I first bought the property. "Look," I said, trying to keep my cool. "I've done everything by the book. I've checked the deed, the zoning, everything. If there's an issue with access to the beach, I'll deal with it, but don't come here and try to intimidate me with threats and vague terms." The sheriff didn't flinch. "I'm not trying to intimidate you, sir. I'm just giving you a heads up. We've had a few complaints from people saying that you're disrupting the usual use of the beach. We need to make sure you're following all the rules, or we may have to take action." I felt the anger building up in my chest. I wasn't going to let this slide. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered under my breath. "I've been coming here for years. I've never heard of these so-called rules before." "What rules? And why are you suddenly involved?" James stepped in then, his tone dripping with impatience. "The rules are the same ones everyone follows, and it's not about whether or not you've heard of them. This isn't just about you anymore. There are people involved who don't want you here, and you're making it harder for everyone by refusing to cooperate." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So, what, you want me to just leave? Because a few people don't like it?" The sheriff's voice was firm but not unkind. "It's not about what they like. It's about maintaining peace and order. People have a right to enjoy the beach, too. And right now, your presence here is making that difficult for some of them." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "I'm not breaking any laws," I said again, my voice tight with frustration. "I'm not disturbing anyone. I'm just here, minding my business." The sheriff gave a small nod, acknowledging my point. "I understand. But the law isn't just about what you're doing, it's about how it affects the community. I'm not saying you're doing anything malicious, but the situation has become a lot more complicated than you realize." I shook my head, feeling a sense of helplessness creeping in.
It wasn't supposed to be this way.
I had a right to be there. But the more I listened, the more it felt like I was getting pushed into a corner. The sheriff was just doing his job, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing control of the situation. "We're not here to make this worse," James said, his voice more conciliatory now. We just want to find a way to resolve this without causing more trouble. But you need to understand that you're not just dealing with me and Karen anymore. This is bigger than that. You're up against the community now, and we're going to do whatever it takes to make sure everyone can enjoy the beach again." I stood there, silently fuming, trying to think of a response. But nothing came. What could I say? I had no idea what their next move would be, but it was clear they weren't just going to let this go.
The community was involved now.
The sheriff was involved. This was spiraling out of control, and no matter how hard I fought to keep it under my control, I had the feeling that I was quickly becoming a pawn in someone else's game. Finally, after a long pause, I spoke, my voice steady, but filled with resolve. "I'm not going anywhere. If you want to take this to court, fine. Let's do it. But I'm not leaving this beach. Not now, not ever." James and the sheriff exchanged a brief look, and for a moment, I thought they might back down. But then the sheriff nodded and said, "We'll see about that." With that, they turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, trying to process everything that had just happened. The battle was far from over. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. The following week was a blur. The beach, which used to be a place where I could unwind, had become a constant source of anxiety. Every time I arrived, I half expected to see that same black SUV creeping down the shoreline, ready to drop off James, the sheriff, or some other surprise visitor. And each time, the tension in my gut would tighten as I scanned the area, wondering if today would be the day they finally forced me to leave. But as the days wore on, something strange happened. I started to notice the people who came to the beach. Not just the usual visitors, families, joggers, surfers, but there were a few new faces. And they were looking at me, not in a friendly way either. More like they were sizing me up, whispering to each other when they thought I wasn't paying attention. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe I was paranoid from all the recent drama. But then I overheard a conversation. It wasn't loud, but it was close enough for me to catch the gist. Two people were talking about that guy who was causing all the trouble on the beach. The way they spoke, it was clear they were talking about me. I didn't know if it was because of Karen's influence or if James had been spreading rumors, but it stung. For the first time since I'd bought the property, I felt like an outsider. The beach, which I had once loved for its solitude, now felt like a battleground. People I didn't know were talking about me, judging me, and I had no idea how much of it was tied to the Karen or her lawyer. But one thing was clear. The longer I stayed, the more I was becoming the villain in someone else's story. I tried not to let it get to me. After all, I had the right to be there. But with every passing day, the pressure was mounting. The constant stares, the whispers, and the visits from the sheriff and James made it harder and harder to enjoy my time on the beach. I was no longer just a guy with a property. I was that guy, the one causing problems for everyone else. It was on one of those days, when I was sitting on the sand trying to block out the stares, that I noticed a familiar figure walking toward me. It was Karen. Of course. This time, she didn't have James with her and there was no sheriff, but her presence still sent a cold shiver down my spine. She walked with that same smug look on her face, as if she already knew she was going to win this battle. She stopped just a few feet away from me, her hands on her hips as she surveyed the scene. "I thought I'd find you here," she said, her voice dripping with that all-too-familiar sense of superiority. "It seems you just can't stay away, can you?" I didn't look at her right away. Instead, I focused on the waves, trying to calm the anger that was bubbling up inside me. I didn't have the energy to argue with her today. "I've told you already," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "This is my land. I'm not going anywhere." She let out a small laugh, as if my words were a joke. "You really think that's going to work?" she asked, stepping closer. "You're making a scene, you know.
People don't like you here."
"I've heard all the complaints. They want you gone." I stood up, facing her at last, my fists clenched. "It's not up to you what people want. It's up to the law. And the law says this is my property. I'm not leaving just because you and a few people don't like it." Karen's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about the law anymore. It's about what's best for the community. And right now, you're not part of that. You're just a thorn in everyone's side, making things harder for all of us. I'm not the one causing the problem, I shot back. You are. You've been stirring up trouble, and now you've got people who don't even know me, judging me. You've made it personal, and I'm not going to let that slide. She took a step closer, her voice lowering. Don't you get it? It's not personal. It's just business. And the longer you stay here, the worse it's going to get for you. You're going to lose. You'll either be forced to sell, or you'll be driven out of here. Either way, you're done. The words hit harder than I expected. I had been so focused on defending my property that I hadn't fully considered what she might be capable of. If she really had the whole community behind her, and if she had enough influence over local officials, maybe she could make life difficult for me. Maybe she could make me wish I had never bought the place. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I'm not selling, and I'm not going anywhere. You're wasting your time. Karen's eyes narrowed. We'll see about that, she said coldly before turning and walking away. I watched her go, my heart racing with a mix of frustration and fear. I had been holding my ground, but I couldn't deny that her words had stung. What if she was right? What if I really was just a thorn in everyone's side, and I was going to lose everything because of it? The next few days were rough. I stayed away from the beach for a couple of days to clear my head, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being suffocated by the pressure. Every time I thought about going back, I felt that same anxiety creeping in. What if someone called the police again? What if there was another confrontation with Karen, or worse, with the sheriff? The worst part was, I didn't know how far she was willing to go to get what she wanted. I sat in my living room one evening, staring at the legal papers in front of me, weighing my options. I could hire a lawyer, fight back legally, and drag this out in court. But how long would that take? How much would it cost? And even if I won, would it really be over, or would she just keep coming at me until I was exhausted? Then there was the thought that kept gnawing at me. What if this was all about more than just the property? What if it was about control? The beach had been a peaceful place for me, a place I had dreamed of owning for years. But to her, it seemed like the perfect symbol of everything she thought she deserved. If she couldn't control me, maybe she was determined to take away the one thing I cared about. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to shake the thoughts. But they lingered. It was clear now that this wasn't just some random dispute. There was more at play here. And the deeper I got into it, the more I realized how dangerous it was to underestimate someone like Karen. I wasn't just fighting for a piece of land anymore. I was fighting for my peace of mind, my sense of freedom. And I wasn't going to let her or anyone else take that away from me. A few days later, I couldn't take it anymore. The anxiety had built up to a breaking point. I decided to go down to the beach, despite everything. I had to face this head-on. I couldn't keep hiding from the tension that had taken over my life. This was my beach, my property, and I was done letting Karen and her allies make me feel like I didn't belong. When I arrived, the beach was quiet. For the first time in what felt like ages, there wasn't a black SUV in sight. I took a deep breath and walked across the sand, my feet sinking into the cool surface as I moved toward my usual spot. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd finally be able to enjoy the beach again, without the ever-present cloud of conflict hanging over me. But that peace didn't last long. As I settled into my chair, the quiet was shattered by the unmistakable sound of a vehicle pulling up. I turned, and sure enough, there it was, the black SUV. My stomach sank. I knew what was coming, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. The vehicle stopped, and James got out, his face tight with determination. No sign of Karen this time, but I could tell this wasn't going to be a casual visit. He looked like he had something to prove. He walked toward me without hesitation, and I stood up to meet him, trying to brace myself for whatever was coming next. "Looks like you're still here," James said, his tone even, but there was an edge to it. "I thought we made it clear that we need to resolve this. It's getting ridiculous." I crossed my arms, not backing down. "I've been clear, too. I'm not going anywhere. I bought this property fair and square, and I'm within my rights to be here." James sighed, rubbing his temples like he was trying to fight off a headache. "I get that. Really, I do. But this situation is escalating in ways no one wants. You've got people upset. You've got people talking. And you've got the community turning against you. This is going to get ugly if it doesn't stop. I took a step toward him, meeting his eyes head on. I didn't start this.
She did.
Karen's the one who's making all the noise, trying to run me off. I'm just standing my ground. He looked around nervously before speaking again, lowering his voice. You're not hearing me, though. This isn't just about Karen anymore. This is about everyone else who's fed up with the drama. You're not just fighting one person, you're fighting the entire neighborhood at this point. That hit me like a punch to the gut. I had heard whispers from a few of the beachgoers, but this was the first time someone had come out and said it so directly. Was it really everyone against me now? I thought back to the stares, the hushed conversations, and the increasing number of strangers who seemed to be looking at me like I was the enemy. It stung more than I wanted to admit. But I wasn't going to let it sway me. I'm not going anywhere, I said firmly. You can tell Karen. You can tell whoever you want. I've got the deed. I've got the law on my side. So, if this is just another attempt to bully me into leaving, you're wasting your time. James shook his head, frustration written all over his face. It's not about bullying you. It's about finding a way to make this work. People are getting restless. There's only so much pressure people can take before something snaps, and I'm telling you, you're not going to win this fight. You're going to lose. I felt my blood start to boil. You don't get it, do you? This isn't a game to me. I'm not going to lose. I'm not the one causing problems here, and I'm not the one who needs to back down. James exhaled sharply, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender.
Fine.
If you're going to keep going with this, then there's nothing I can do. But don't say you weren't warned. With that, he turned and walked back to his car, leaving me standing there, feeling a mixture of defiance and frustration. It was clear that he was trying to pressure me, trying to get me to cave. But I wasn't going to fold. I had come this far, and I wasn't backing down now. As the SUV disappeared down the road, I stood there for a while, staring out at the water. The waves rolled in and out, calm and steady, indifferent to the drama playing out on the shore. For a moment, I let the sound of the ocean soothe my nerves. The beach was still mine, and no matter how much they tried to turn it into something else, it wouldn't change that. But the reality hit me hard. It wasn't just about me anymore.
The whole community was involved.
Karen had made sure of that. And I couldn't pretend that the whole thing wasn't starting to take a toll on me. The isolation I once enjoyed had been replaced with pressure from all sides. People had chosen sides. And it felt like no matter what I did, there was always someone lurking in the background, waiting for me to slip up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation with James in my head. He'd warned me, yes, but it wasn't just a warning. It was a message. The community was turning against me. I had to face that truth, no matter how hard it was to swallow. At the same time, I couldn't shake the thought that I was still in control. I had every right to be there. If they wanted to turn it into a war, then fine. But I wasn't going to let Karen and her cronies push me around. They wanted to make me the bad guy.
I could live with that.
As long as I had the beach, as long as I had my land, I could fight this fight. But how much longer could I keep going like this? How far was I willing to let this escalate before it destroyed everything I'd worked for? The weight of the situation felt heavier than ever before. The next few days felt like a slow burn. I didn't know what to expect anymore. I'd heard nothing from James or Karen, and for a while, I thought maybe they'd backed off. Maybe they were waiting for me to crack under the pressure. But even without their presence, I could feel the tension in the air every time I went to the beach. It was like the whole place had become a stage for something I didn't sign up for, a battle I never asked for, and yet, here I was, stuck in the middle of it all. But as I pulled up to the beach that day, everything was different. There was a crowd gathered near the entrance. A small group of locals stood there, talking, pointing in my direction. I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. The whispers were getting louder. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her, Karen. She was standing by the crowd, her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on me. I could tell she was the one pulling the strings. I wasn't just facing one person anymore. I was up against an entire group, and I was beginning to realize just how isolated I really was. I parked my car and made my way toward the group, my heart pounding with each step. As I approached, one of the locals noticed me and quickly turned away, murmuring something to the person next to them. It was clear that the people here had already made up their minds about me. I reached Karen, who was now smiling that all-too-familiar smile. Well, she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. Looks like you're still hanging around, huh? I thought we made it clear. This beach isn't for you. Not anymore. I tried to hold my ground, but inside I was shaken. This beach is for me. I own it. You can't just take it away from me because you don't like it. She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about ownership. This is about community.
About peace.
And you're disrupting it. You've already made enough of a scene. People don't want you here. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of her words. The community was against me. There was no denying it now. But I couldn't give up. I wasn't going to let her take everything from me. Not without a fight. I'm not going anywhere, I said, my voice steady. You can try all you want, but this is my property. The law's on my side. Karen laughed softly. The law? You think that's going to help you now? This is bigger than law. Bigger than rights. This is about people. And you're not one of us. I felt the crowd's eyes on me, judging me, and for the first time, I understood what James had been warning me about. I wasn't just fighting Karen anymore. I was fighting an entire community that was rallying against me, and no matter how hard I tried to push back, I knew it would take something more than legal documents to change their minds. A heavy silence fell over us as Karen waited for me to respond. I could see the crowd, the murmurs getting louder, and I realized something important. They weren't going to let this go. They wanted me gone, and the more I fought, the more I'd become the villain in their eyes. But I refused to back down. I'm not going to let you control me, I said firmly, my hands clenched at my sides.
You don't own this beach.
I do. Karen tilted her head slightly, her smile fading. You're wrong, she said softly. You may own the land, but you'll never own this place. Not in the eyes of the people. And that's all that matters. And with that, she turned away, her voice carrying as she spoke to the crowd, urging them to move along. I stood there, staring after her, my heart pounding in my chest. The battle was far from over, but I was starting to wonder if it was even worth it anymore. Days passed in a blur after that. I kept going to the beach, but the once peaceful haven had turned into a battleground. The whispers grew louder. The tension felt like a constant weight on my shoulders. The beach was still mine, but it felt like I was losing it, bit by bit. The community had turned against me, and every visit felt like another step deeper into the war I hadn't asked for. One day, as I arrived, I saw something I wasn't prepared for. There were no crowds, no protests, no signs of the usual tension. In fact, the beach seemed quieter than usual. I parked my car, my pulse racing with a mix of dread and curiosity. What was going on? As I stepped onto the sand, I saw him, the sheriff. He was standing at the edge of my property, his eyes scanning the horizon. He spotted me almost immediately and began walking toward me. Hey, he said, his tone surprisingly calm. Can we talk for a minute? I didn't know what to expect, but I could tell this wasn't going to be another confrontation. It felt different, more like a conversation than a conflict. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. Listen, he began, glancing over his shoulder. I'm not here to make your life harder. I've been watching how this has been going, and I can see you've got every right to be here. But the situation's gotten complicated. There's been a lot of pressure from the community. I crossed my arms, still on edge. So, what? You're here to throw me off the land? The sheriff shook his head.
No.
Not at all. But you need to understand that there's a balance between rights and reality. The law might say you own this land, but there's also a human side to it. The longer this drags on, the more the community feels like it's being torn apart. People are fed up. I looked out at the beach, the familiar waves rolling in, feeling the weight of his words. Was this it? Was I really going to lose everything? I'm not giving up, I said quietly, almost to myself. I've worked too hard for this. It's not just about the property. It's about having the right to live my life without someone telling me I don't belong. The sheriff nodded slowly. I get it. And I'm not here to tell you what to do. But you need to think about what's worth fighting for. There's a limit to what one person can stand up against. I stood there for a moment, staring out at the horizon, feeling the full weight of everything that had happened. The law might be on my side, but the community wasn't. And as much as I hated to admit it, that mattered. I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep fighting like this. Finally, I turned to the sheriff. Thanks for the warning. He gave me a nod, a quiet understanding in his eyes. Take care of yourself. With that, he turned and walked away. The beach, for the first time in what felt like ages, was silent. I sat down on the sand, staring out at the water, letting the sound of the waves wash over me. This battle wasn't over yet, but the road ahead felt more uncertain than ever. I had to decide if it was still worth it, if standing my ground was truly the right choice, or if, in the end, it was just going to cost me everything.